The largest financial crime in human history could have been ended with one phone call. The government had the number. The criminal gave it to them himself. Spring 2006. Bernie Madoff is under oath, across a table from the agency that polices Wall Street. They ask the one question a Ponzi scheme cannot survive: where do your trades settle? And he has no choice. He gives them a real account number, 646. Dial it, and there are no trades, no strategy, nothing. Just money coming in and money going out. Madoff went home that night certain he was finished. He said so later to federal investigators, quote, "I thought it was the end game, over. Monday morning they'll call DTC and this will be over." And it never happened. Nobody called. Not that Monday, not ever. And here's what the government's own files admit. This wasn't the first warning they buried. It was the sixth. Why does nobody call? Start with who they'd have been calling about. Bernard Madoff was not a stranger at the gates of Wall Street. He built the gates. His firm was one of the 5 broker-dealers most closely involved in developing the NASDAQ stock market, and he served as chairman of NASDAQ's board of directors. His brother sat on the board of the Depository Trust Corporation itself. That's the company you'd call to check on him. And on the 17th floor of a Manhattan office tower, his other business, the quiet one, did something no fund on earth could do. It never really lost. One of his biggest feeder funds reported 174 months of returns, 14 and a half years. Just 7 of those months were negative. 7. A market that rose, a market that crashed, dot-com bust, 9/11. And this line barely flickered. Investors called it the surest thing in finance. They fought to get in. They bragged about having, quote, special access. Here's the thing about a line that never goes down. To a certain kind of mind, a mind that does math for a living, it doesn't look safe. It looks impossible. And in Boston, one of those minds was about to run the numbers. His name was Harry Markopolos, a derivatives analyst, a quant. His employer wanted him to build a product that could compete with Madoff's returns. So he took Madoff's numbers apart to see how the machine worked. It took him hours to see it. The machine could not exist. The strategy Madoff claimed to run would have needed to buy more options than existed on the exchange. The returns didn't correlate with the market they were supposedly built from. Nobody on earth bats 96%. By his own account, Markopolos first walked into the SEC's Boston office as early as 1999. The government's own report dates his first formal submission to May 2000. Either way, the century had barely turned, and the SEC had the case on paper. They passed. He came back in 2001 with more. That same year, 2 reputable financial publications ran articles openly questioning Madoff's impossibly consistent returns. The report confirms the SEC knew about both. They passed again. So in November 2005, he wrote it all down, 19 pages. He gave it a title that required no interpretation. The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud. 29 red flags, numbered. The impossible return line. The one-man audit shop. The fee structure that made no sense. Madoff was voluntarily giving away hundreds of millions in fees a real manager would have kept. Red flag 24. Quote, "Only Madoff family members are privy to the investment strategy." He even did the SEC's staffing work for them. Page 12. A witness list. The heads of derivatives research at Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, with their phone numbers, and a note that one of them, quote, "Can't believe that the SEC hasn't shut down Bernie Madoff yet." And on page 2, a sentence that reads today like prophecy. Scenario 2. Quote, highly likely, Madoff Securities is the world's largest Ponzi scheme. He didn't sign it. He asked that his name never be released, because he had done the arithmetic on what happens to the man who unravels a fraud this size. Quote, I am worried about the personal safety of myself and my family. He wasn't being dramatic. He estimated the fraud at perhaps $30 billion and rising. So, a signed, sealed, delivered case, written by an expert, with a witness list. What did the SEC do with it? The answer is in their own internal report, and it's stranger than doing nothing. After the collapse, the SEC investigated itself. 477 pages. We read all of them. Between June 1992 and December 2008, the SEC received 6 substantive complaints about Madoff's operation. Arguably 8. One of them arrived in 3 versions. 1992, 16 years before the end, customers of a firm called Avellino and Bienz came to the SEC with documents. Documents offering what the government's report describes in quotes as 100% safe investments. All the money was being managed by Madoff. The SEC investigated. They were inside his operation, and the examiners sought his records from Madoff himself, not from the independent depository. They took the fraud's word for it and walked away. Then Markopoulos in 2000, again in 2001, the 19 pages in 2005. A hedge fund manager whose complaint, the SEC's own manager admitted, laid out the, quote, indicia of a Ponzi scheme. An anonymous informant who told them, quote, I decided to withdraw all my money, over $5 million. And in December 2006, a concerned citizen directing the SEC's attention to, quote, a scandal of major proportion. And these warnings didn't vanish into one drawer. They triggered real activity. That's the strangest part. The 1992 complaint became an investigation. The 2003 complaint from the confidential hedge fund manager became an examination in Washington. The Renaissance emails became a second examination in New York. Markopoulos's 19 pages became a full enforcement investigation. 3 examinations, 2 investigations, 16 years, and the report's conclusion about all of it, quote, a thorough and competent investigation or examination was never performed. Different offices, different years, and they didn't talk to each other. At one point, 2 SEC teams were examining Madoff at the same time, and neither knew the other existed. The report's own word for it is, quote, astoundingly. And the way they found out? Quote, it was Madoff himself who informed one of the examination teams that the other examination team had already received the information they were seeking. The fraud was better organized than the regulator. Why? Not bribery, not conspiracy. The report found something more ordinary and more chilling. They didn't believe the messenger. The enforcement staff, quote, considered the evidence of little value because Markopoulos was not a Madoff investor or someone personally involved in the alleged Ponzi scheme. Think about what that means. The one man who could see the fraud from the outside was disqualified for being on the outside. And it wasn't only him they didn't believe. In April 2004, an SEC examiner discovered internal emails from Renaissance Technologies, the smartest hedge fund on the planet, privately tearing Madoff's numbers apart. Their research chief cited, quote, independent evidence that his executions were highly unusual. Their executive, Nat Simons, wrote, quote, the risk-reward on this bet is not in our favor. And then, please keep this confidential. Even the people too smart to invest were too afraid to say it out loud. And now the twist that turns this from failure into tragedy. Those botched examinations didn't just miss the fraud, they fed it. The report found that hesitant investors were, quote, reassured by the fact that the SEC had investigated and/or examined Madoff and found no evidence of fraud. And Madoff knew it. Quote, Madoff proactively informed potential investors that the SEC had examined his operations. Every failed investigation became a sales brochure. The government's seal of not quite approval, the best marketing a Ponzi scheme ever had. Which brings us back to that conference room in 2006. The SEC had finally opened an investigation, case number NY07653, and for the first time, they had Madoff himself under oath. He lied to them fluently, but then they asked the one question a Ponzi scheme cannot survive: where do the trades settle? And Madoff, boxed in, handed them the key. Account 646 at the Depository Trust Company. The Depository Trust Company is not a mystery. It is where Wall Street's trades actually live. A regulator can pull a position report. Madoff knew exactly what that meant. And here's what makes the next part unforgivable. The investigators were not fooled. Their very first investigative step, the report's words, revealed that Madoff had lied about a fundamental component of his claimed trading activity. The staff attorney on the case testified about confronting him, quote, he attempted to portray this as a misunderstanding. It did bother me. I did not think it was resolved. I did believe that he was not forthright. They knew he was lying. They wrote it down. And still, the one call that would have proved it was never made. Quote, it was obvious they thought that something was amiss. I thought it was the end game. Over. Monday morning they'll call DTC and this will be over. And it never happened. He waited for a phone call that never came. Quote, when enforcement did not follow up with DTC, I was astonished. He told investigators he thought, quote, after all this, I got away lucky, and that living with the certainty of eventual discovery was, quote, the nightmare I lived with. The Inspector General's verdict on that moment, quote, this was perhaps the most egregious failure in the enforcement investigation of Madoff, that they never verified Madoff's purported trading with any independent third parties. The investigation sat inactive for 18 months. Then, on January 3, 2008, it was officially closed. 2 years later, almost to the week, the FBI was at his door. The scheme ran on for 2 more years, and it did not end because anyone caught him. The file has one more entry, and it's the one that should keep regulators up at night. In March 2008, after the case was closed, the SEC chairman's own office received the complaint again, updated. It now included this sentence, quote, Mr. Bernard Madoff keeps 2 sets of records, the most interesting of which is on his computer, which is always on his person. 2 sets of books, named to the top of the agency 9 months before the end. It was forwarded to enforcement, and nothing changed. In December 2008, the market did what the regulator wouldn't. The financial crisis sent investors running for their money. Redemption requests Madoff could not pay because the money was not there. He confessed to his sons, and the FBI came for him on the morning of December 11th. 11 felony counts. He pleaded guilty to all of them and stood in a Manhattan courtroom and said the sentence out loud. Quote, Your Honor, for many years up until my arrest on December 11, 2008, I operated a Ponzi scheme. The address he gave for the crime was 885 3rd Avenue, the 17th floor. At sentencing, Judge Denny Chin used a word judges almost never use, Quote, "Objectively speaking, the fraud was staggering. The forfeiture order was a number that does not sound real. $170,799,000,000. The sentence? 150 years. And then, in February 2009, Harry Markopolos finally got his hearing, in front of Congress, under his own name. Quote, "I gift-wrapped and delivered the largest Ponzi scheme in history to them, and somehow they couldn't be bothered to conduct a thorough and proper investigation because they were too busy on matters of higher priority. If a $50 billion Ponzi scheme doesn't make the SEC's priority list, then I want to know who sets their priorities." The congressman turned on the SEC's own panel. One of them, to their faces, quote, "You guys as an agency act like you are deaf, dumb, and blind." And then, as the officials stonewalled, "Don't you dare tell anybody you testified before Congress." 6 months later, the Inspector General delivered the 477-page autopsy we've been reading this whole time. Its bottom line, quote, "Credible and specific allegations regarding Madoff's financial wrongdoing were repeatedly brought to the attention of SEC staff, but were never recommended to the Commission for action. 16 years of warnings, 0 phone calls." But here's the part of this story almost nobody knows. What happened to the money? When the music stopped, the November 2008 account statements said Madoff's clients held $64.8 billion. Almost none of it existed. What victims actually handed over was less, and what happened next is the half of this story nobody tells. A court-appointed trustee spent 15 years clawing the money back, from the feeder funds, from the banks, from the estates of the early winners. As of this summer, $15.48 billion recovered, nearly 73 cents of every dollar of allowed claims paid back. And a second fund, run by the Justice Department, sent another $4.3 billion to more than 40,000 victims in 127 countries. Final payment, December 2024. By its measure, victims recovered nearly 94%. The trustees' 17th distribution, the latest, went out in February of this year. 17 years on, the checks are still going out. Where did that money come from? The single biggest piece, $2.2 billion, came from the estate of one dead investor who had quietly taken out more than he put in. And $1.7 billion came from Madoff's own bank, J.P. Morgan, which took 2 criminal charges for looking the other way. The government said the bank never filed the suspicious activity report American law required. Bernie Madoff died in a federal prison medical center on April 14, 2021. Harry Markopolos is still the man who was right for 9 years, while nobody returned his calls. The Securities and Exchange Commission was created to make one kind of phone call. For 16 years, 6 warnings sat in its files. One of them titled in plain English, "The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud." The number was 646. All anyone had to do was dial